I would like to bring in my next guest. I have waited for this conversation for a very long time. Koffi Kouakou is an African analyst, senior research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at University of Johannesburg. Welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm doing all right. Thanks, Jamal. Long time.
Long time. I appreciate you coming on. Now, look, I want to apologize to you on the show. The last time I rushed, heard you off, I did not necessarily manage my time all that well. And as I said, that will never happen again. I appreciate you joining me, man. Thank you for this.
No, that's okay. You're welcome.
There is big news taking place in West Africa. Cote d'Ivoire is kicking out the French. And apparently Chad is following behind it. Chad has not even had an overthrow, and they are still following behind, kicking out the French. It seems that the sentiment from the Sahel states are spreading. How far is this going to go? And what does this mean in regards to this region that the French are now being shown their walking papers?
I think this is an excellent topic. Remember, you and I, for the past year and a half, we've been talking about this, and I kept saying, please, Jamal, with your host on the other side, saying, watch this, something is happening. We need to pay attention. We're a bit worried that it may not pick up if the Western powers were to squash it, but it seems like it's not pulling a momentum right across West Africa. And as I keep saying, it's probably going to come all the way down to Southern Africa. But what is important is it's such a huge information and news. And first, before we talk about where is it going to go, we need to say, what does it mean? And what it means is there's a great deal of sort of freedom energies that are now spewing out around West Africa. Since Mali managed to get the coup with the citizen-led coup, same thing happened to Burkina Faso with President Ibrahim Traoré, and then with Abdourahmane Chani in Niger, and we can see that it's also picking up in Chad, and of course Senegal. But all of them don't have the military. They're not all military coups. For example, in Senegal, there's a sense that Africans need to sort of assume their sovereignties, being economic, political, or especially military. And one area which is really kicking really well is that they just don't want to have foreign military on the territories anymore, in the country. So that sovereignty, I think it's a great way to start with on the military and security side of it. And they've managed to do it very smartly, especially Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, by sort of having an associated partnership with Russia. And with Russia's success, and then now strength in Ukraine against NATO and the United States, people were really comfortable and saying we need to have this partnership. But it didn't mean that they wanted to have another, set of new military bases in their countries. And this is what the kind of trend and wave we see now going through West Africa. So from Mali to Burkina Faso, from Burkina Faso to Niger, and then we've seen in Chad, with President Déby Itno, and then now with Diomaye Faye and his mentor Sonko in Senegal. So we can even, and now it's moved to Cote d'Ivoire, as you say. You've seen that this is a big deal, because I have to tell you, this is a huge surprise to me that the French naturally, without people complaining, they seem to have sort of withdrawn very quickly, and they may be sensing something. But as I said to you again, the big elephant in the room nobody's talking about is that deal, the sort of military base that Secretary Blinken and then the NATO heads have cut with Cote d'Ivoire to have a military base in the northwestern part of Cote d'Ivoire.
What is it going to, well, let's go to, I want to move, yeah, okay. What does it mean that, wait a minute, from my understanding, they were removing that military base at Cote d'Ivoire, or did I misunderstand that?
The French in July, July.
The U.S. still has their base there.
They have about 4 or 5 of them, and they were sort of downgrading them from 1,000 or more military to about 600. So they were progressively and steadily doing that.
I
But
see.
this announcement this week has been shocking to everybody. Saying, "Wow, what is really happening? Do the French have something in the basket and they're hiding? We don't know about, or have they not understood that they have to leave? They have to sort of clean slates and move away, and then start to have better relationship with African countries they used to colonize."
Wow, that is amazing. I mean, from your point of view, the ECOWAS, the last time we had this conversation, when all of this first took place with Niger, ECOWAS was threatening to overthrow the government, which is, again, astonishing. I remember when it came out. All things being equal, those end up just being threats. With this kind of changeover where you're getting the Sahel states that seem to be lumping into kind of a union of sorts, not necessarily one thing, but definitely working in tandem and working in unison. What does this mean for ECOWAS? I mean, for all intents and purposes, their threats failed. They didn't go through with this kind of takeover that they were trying to go with. So what does it mean for ECOWAS that they no longer have the control, or let's say no longer have the influence to influence these states?
I mean, this is huge. It's huge because what it means for ECOWAS is a loss of power, a loss of influence, but also, as you know, this weekend, in fact, yesterday, there was the celebration of, there was a meeting, a ECOWAS meeting, but they're hoping that they will have another meeting coming up in January to celebrate the 50th anniversary. And what else? What is it there to celebrate when ECOWAS, a 15-member organization, loses 3 and is about to probably lose a little bit more? So that's the real meaning there. It's a meaning also of shame, not being able to have consolidated the union. And people are now finding ECOWAS as an irrelevant institution, at least they're looking at it as a club of incompetent African leaders who are doing the bidding of France and NATO and foreign powers, rather than paying attention to the serious economic issues, because that's what it is all about. Economic issues and the mobility for people to move around and then improve their daily lives, deal with extreme poverty, unemployment. I mean, as you already know, unemployment in ECOWAS is huge. Most of the young people are just trekking to Europe, dying in the Mediterranean. And that is a shame that ECOWAS is not dealing with, as well as not dealing seriously with terrorism in those Sahelian countries. So it is a shameful position they're in. And the current president, who's now curating the sort of presidentship, if you want to call it, President Bola Tinubu of Nigeria, I mean, he's really in a very difficult position. They haven't been able to convince the 3 Sahelian states to come back. In fact, the Sahelian states are saying our decisions is irreversible. We've now established a confederation of 3 states, and there are rumors also, not just rumors, but it seems like something that could be officialized soon. The new president of Ghana, John Mahama, who was president before, now reelected, he seemed to have some sympathies with ECOWAS, and not ECOWAS, sorry, with the alliance of the Sahelian states. And if this really takes place, it gives access to the sea, to the Gulf of Guinea, to the Sahelian states, and then they start to build up that momentum across the region. It could be possible that in the long run, Cote d'Ivoire and other countries join the alliance. It could be possible. But at this stage, what it means, as I said, is it's a very shameful moment for ECOWAS. And then managing that shame is also very difficult.
Oh, that's fascinating. Because what it means, yeah, that's fascinating. If I look at this in a political sense, like taking out Africa for the moment and just any political situation, the people who are in the Sahel states at this point have defined themselves as being independent. We are not. We have thrown off the shackles of the colonial masters in this case. And if you're looking at ECOWAS, you say you haven't. That is it's almost like it's an indictment. It's almost like by definition of their positioning, their political positioning, ECOWAS is kind of stuck in the past in the way that it operates, in the way that I guess people would see it in Africa. It's this kind of relic of an organization as opposed to the Sahel states that have thrown off the yoke of their previous oppressors. Is that the way it's being viewed in Africa at this point? Meaning, is the reason that other groups are looking at maybe joining or going towards the Sahel states? I mean, for God's sake, Chad is even making this decision. There's been no, overthrow in Chad. They're moving because it seems that the political gravity is going towards West Africa in this sense. But correct me if I'm wrong. Am I right or wrong in that?
No, you're totally right. I mean, and then let me repeat it again. The major consequences that's a huge setback for ECOWAS for losing three top big countries. I mean, these two countries combined make about 2 to 3 million square kilometers. That's a large size. This is about a third of the United States. That's big. And a third of China, yes. And so that setback translates into a loss of credibility, a loss of influence, incompetence. So this whole thing turns around the reputational management that ECOWAS need to deal with. And it seems the people who are many call the club of incompetent African leaders are not seeing it. They're just meeting to drink champagne. Of course, the French are probably supplying that champagne. And as you probably already know, Nigeria is the top consumer of French champagne in Africa. So they probably have some of them there in Abuja that they're drinking. But in any case, it is difficult because it's both painful and laughable. And that the confluence of these two things are just painful because Africans are trying to find a way to get away from this sort of colonial mentality where Africans cannot, I mean, ECOWAS, for example, is not even supported by its own people, the countries at a rate of the funding. The European unions, funds literally ECOWAS. And France has a huge impact there, especially on Bola Tinubu, who is now the current president. In fact, President Tinubu was in Paris, I think, last month. And it turned out it was such a disaster to a certain degree because it didn't help in terms of reputational management. So, but why is the President Tinubu going there to talk to President Macron, who is probably his second or third son, right? And figure out what is he going to tell his own people here back in ECOWAS. And when young people are looking at that, and another element in this whole thing is that there have been many platforms where young Africans can express themselves. Thousands of them are now making analysis. They're now seeing, they're getting educated about what's going on in ECOWAS in West Africa. And they have enough of it about this neo-colonial situation, and they want to get out of it. That's one of the reasons they really are praising for the success of those three military countries now.
So the main things are going to be security and economy, I would imagine, as their main priorities. Have they started moving on those? How do they plan to, let's say, actualize those objectives from the standpoint of economy and, for that matter, security?
Yeah, they are doing it among themselves. There's now easy movement between the three countries, not only for goods, at least the goods they have economically, but also militarily, they're supporting each other. But they have also set many commissions, especially ministers who are looking at economic union. Now, they haven't left another economic union. For some reason, I forgot the name, forgot the translation in English, but in French it's called UMOA, which is another unitary union that allows them to use the franc CFA. I'm sure you've heard about this franc CFA issue. And the franc CFA is a monetary union. It's a currency that the French created to be able to sort of continuously colonize African countries that used to be under the old colonial rules. And that money is being used across 15 African countries. Probably when we get another chance, I'll be able to explain that. But it's some money that's been used to really keep Africans down, because the way it's used is not really favorable to economic growth, employment, dealing with development issues in those 15 countries. So those 3 countries are still member of it, but they're looking at finding ways to really create their own monetary confederation union, where all kinds of new bills are circulating, but they haven't taken effect yet. But they're trying to do that gradually and then slowly, so that they do it well. And as time goes on, they will be able to create a small monetary union that will help them out.
Can we talk about South Africa for a moment? I got to be honest, I am fascinated, or at the very least, I've become fascinated with South African politics, especially talking to you about it. The ANC is supposed to be a revolutionary organization. At the very least, it was. And it seems that they've transitioned into more of a governing organization as opposed to a revolutionary organization. But they're, what is the EFF or the EFF, I believe. There's another group, but there's also, what is the name of the group? It'll come to me in a moment. It's the apartheid.
Democratic Alliance.
Thank you.
Democratic Alliance.
So the Democratic Alliance was merged on some level into the government of the ANC because of the election result. That was the worst election result that the ANC had for like 30 years. That's the entire time they've been in operation. How has that gone? I mean, because I got to be honest, I always thought that the Democratic Alliance was a stalking horse in that government, and that it was a horrible choice, allowing the Democratic Alliance to be in the government. But I could be wrong. I don't live there. What has been going on in South Africa recently in the government, in this kind of coalition government that's been formed?
Look, it's been a mixed, some kind of a mixed analysis. Many people, in fact, think that, the ANC has been duped, that in fact, it's not the ANC that's now ruling. The government of national unity is now being ruled by the Democratic Alliance. In fact, there is a very interesting profile interview launch, FT Financial Times launch this weekend with Ellen Ziller, who is the chair of the Democratic Alliance. Very interesting article. If you get a chance, take a look at it. However, what is more important is that it at least the ministers of the Democratic Alliance and other parties are doing extraordinarily well in terms of publicity, making people believe that they're doing really well. They're just delivering in less than 100 or 200 days, and they're just using the media. They're on TikTok, they're on WhatsApp, they're just getting their messages out. Yeah, and they're overwhelming informationally, strategically. They're overwhelming the African National Congress. I mean, the president has this, President Cyril Ramaphosa has this way of communicating with his people by newsletters. He gets out a monthly newsletter, a weekly on Monday newsletter, which I think it's not enough. You should be able to speak to your people directly. As a former president of Mexico used to take 2 or 3 hours every Monday, or in fact every day or so, to talk to people. And so the DA, the Democratic Alliance, and their ministers have managed to be very cleverly organized, and then they're really leading the front when it comes to informing people. What are they doing? I mean, especially you take 2 of them, the one at the Home Affairs, which deals with visas and all these things. They're trying to cut a deal to have free visas for Ukrainians to come to South Africa, for example. And that really that irritated a lot of Black people to figure out you can't get visa from our own brothers in Zimbabwe, in Namibia and Malawi, but you're cutting a deal with Ukraine. And so that created a little bit of controversy, but they're doing their work. So the African National Congress is really, really under pressure to prove something. But the new ministers who are not from the African National Congress are putting a great deal of pressure on them. And there's a sense that things are now moving a little bit. So people are attempting to deliver. And I've noticed also that the president himself finally has come out this past week. It was in KwaZulu-Natal, one of the provinces in the sort of southern eastern part of the country, telling the people there, look, I love this because it was quite blunt. He said, look, wait, it's not enough to have a motto of the province that says, this is a province where the sun rises, right? Because that's one of the motto. He said it should be a province where we build cars, we build this, we create jobs for our people. These are the kind of things we want to see. And it was a bit blunt. This is the first time I heard him saying that. So he's now under pressure to deal with economic issues. I mean, as you know, some of the biggest challenges, which we call here in a jargon, Afropocalypse, which means the biggest challenges that the continent is facing as Afropocalypse, extreme poverty, extreme inequalities, extreme unemployment, crime, and then corruption. These five are the big horses of the Afropocalypse. There are a lot of more like xenophobia and so forth, but these are really big issues. And South Africa hasn't been able to grapple with them very well, especially over the past 15 years. Economic growth is really not going anywhere. I mean, this is an oxymoron. As a young man at the World Bank, I hear this thing in South Africa where they're talking about negative growth. I said to myself, for goodness sake, what kind of oxymoron is this? Is this growth? It can't be negative. We just grew minus 0.2. It just grew, and it doesn't make sense. So the language is very cryptic. But what is important is they're trying their best. People are very unhappy right now, especially the majority of Black people think things are not going well. And the new party called the Mkhonto Sizwe of the former President Zuma, which is now the number one opposition party and the top party in the country, that sort of give a shoulder push to the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters, who just had this weekend, last Sunday, to close their big December meeting. And their president, which they call him the Commander-in-Chief, President Julius Malema, is also under huge pressure to change the nature of his governance and his leadership, because he's lost close to the top 10 of all the people who were leading with him. So it's a big time fragmented issue. South Africa is really going under a lot of crisis and turmoil.
I'm curious, if you had to look at Africa as a whole, and I know that's difficult, the second largest continent, it's a slew of different countries in its totality. But if you have to look at it as a whole, what is the thing that is causing the economic, let's say, duress in the country, or not the country, on the continent itself? Like, what would, if you had to put, and to make it more simple, for South Africa itself, what would be the thing that's the main issue in regards to economic stagnation in South Africa, or for that matter, even in West Africa?
Yes, excellent question, Jamal. That's one of the reasons I use the term Afropocalypse, because it goes right across. They all have similar symptoms and deeper crises that they all share. All those five Afropocalypse issues that I've mentioned: extreme poverty, extreme inequality, unemployment, crime, and then corruption and all of that. They still have the same thing. But the biggest, the most important response to your question is the legacy of colonialism still remain. All these economic systems sort of have the structure, the infrastructures of these things. Everywhere you go, the sort of neocolonialism and capitalism have created all these things, even when they're sitting on an enormous amount of resources like South Africa. I mean, South Africa is 1,200,000 and something square kilometers, a small population of 62 million, according to the last census. Almost 3,000 kilometers of ocean, ocean side. I mean, you couldn't find any better places. The Chinese are looking at this place and say, how in the world are these people enabled to grow economically? But we know it, and the answer is the neocolonial structures and economic system that still underpins the way this country is is what's really creating all these problems. Very deep-rooted crisis. However, the people who still hold the economic powers don't want to change. And one of the groups is financing the Democratic Alliance. And people are saying we need to restructure the system so that people can have jobs, can create jobs. We change the structure of poverty, inequalities, and so forth. This is the answer for you. The same thing is happening in former French colonies in West Africa, especially in Cote d'Ivoire, my own country, in Mali, same thing in Senegal, same thing in Ghana, the same thing. So all these are sort of beset by this kind of structural, deepening neocolonial structures that are not going anywhere. And it's going to take a revolution, and that revolution is coming up. And I'm sure you've heard it. Mali has recently managed to pay off its debt to the IMF. Burkina Faso is doing the same thing. And we just heard rumors coming from Niger as well. I mean, in less than 2 years,
wow,
military government, whom everybody is insulting, is paying off their debts. But civilian governments in other countries haven't been able to do it. Something is wrong somewhere.
Wow. Wow.
It's incredible. I mean, it's not, it's really not, it's not an exaggeration. You can check the evidence is showing up daily. You know, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Niger, they're doing their best to really find a way to have economic sovereignty, but also political sovereignty. They want to rule themselves. They want to have ways to represent themselves at the UN. They want to be a countries where people are free.
I'm glad you brought that up. We have about 2 minutes left. The UN Security Council. Is Africa going to get a place on the UN Security Council?
I don't think so. I don't think so now, because I got to tell you why. You know, Africans themselves have to agree on who's going to be there. Is this a voice? Is this only one voice that's going to represent Africa? And if you do that, it really dilutes the power of all these 55 or 54 countries. Now, 54 according to the UN, 55 according to the African Union. It dilutes all these powers. And Africans are looking for, the last one I was hearing was 2 seats. And you ask yourself, like, who came up with this nonsense idea, 2 seats? You got 54 big countries. Africa is 30 million square kilometers. About, let's say what, 4 times the United States and China. 2 seats. And then of course the US is saying, we're gonna give you 2 seats, but without vetoes. Anyway, that's my closing point.
Well, at that point, that's not really, right. That's not really a seat at the UN Security Council then, that's something else. Koffi, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate this. It's great rundown. It's very rare when we get to have a conversation about Africa and the States. And so
we should
have
legacy.
More. Well, right. It's a legacy of Faultlines. And I always appreciate being able to connect with you to discuss this. So thank you for this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks always, Jamal.
Oh, absolutely, man. Koffi Kouakou, he's an Africa analyst, senior research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Be safe, man. Have a good one.
You're welcome.
All right. We have a moment before our next guests come in. I'm going to say, if you dig this content, like it, share it, subscribe to it. My goal is to reach 40K by the end of the year, and damn it, it's a goal, but I think we can do it. It's a steep hill to climb, but I still think we can do it together. So definitely share this content, subscribe to it, hit the emergency notification bell. I pop in at all hours of the day and night. I'm an insomniac, and so it could be 2 a.m. and I'll be out here doing the news. So definitely hit the notification bell. I do not expect you to be up at 2 a.m., but just in case you are, right here. Also, if you really dig the content and you find yourself coming back here often, you can always support this content through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. All chats will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. All of it, in real terms, helps the show. Even if it's $1, fair enough, it helps the show. All of it does. Even if it's a like for the video, even if it's a share for the video, all of it helps the show. And you have my deep appreciation for doing any of it. Honest to God, you do. My guests will be up shortly. We're going to have a conversation with KJ No. There have been right many events that have been taking place